Hello, you seekers of truth and wisdom. Welcome to the show. Today we're diving into the potential long-term effects of Donald Trump's educational policies on the future of education in the United States. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, education policy. That's about as exciting as watching paint dry on C-SPAN. And you know what? You're not wrong. It's not exactly a laugh riot. But, and this is a big but, it affects all of us. Whether you've got kids, are thinking about having kids, or just enjoy a functioning society. Because what happens in our schools doesn't stay in our schools. It spills out into every corner of our lives. So buckle up, because we're about to examine the potential fallout of Trump's education legacy. And spoiler alert, it's not pretty. All right, let's start with what's actually being taught in classrooms. Because under Trump, we saw a full-blown assault on anything that even hinted at critical thinking. We're talking about policies that make it seem like history started yesterday. And the biggest problem facing America is someone saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. And look, I'm not saying every history book needs to read like a Kendrick Lamar album, but pretending uncomfortable truths don't exist doesn't make them disappear. It just creates a generation woefully unprepared to deal with the complexities of the real world. And let's be honest, the real world is complex enough without pretending racism was solved with a Coke commercial, and that gender is as simple as checking a box. Right, let's talk about school choice, the education equivalent of saying, I don't see color, while simultaneously advocating for policies that disproportionately harm marginalized communities. The idea sounds nice on paper. Parents get to choose where their kids can go to school. Everyone's happy, right? Except it's not quite that simple, because in reality, school choice often translates to funneling public funds away from already struggling public schools and into the hands of private institutions that can just cherry pick their students. It's like setting up a pie eating contest where some kids get a fork and others have to use their fingers. Sure, technically, everyone has a choice, but the eventual outcome is rigged from the start. And the long-term consequences, let's just say it doesn't exactly scream equal opportunity for all. Now let's talk about the people on the front lines of this educational Thunderdome, the teachers. You know, those beleaguered souls who spend their days wrangling sugar-fueled kids and their nights grading papers for wages that would make a Mexican field hand weep. They're the very backbone of our education system, and yet, under Trump, we saw a concerted effort to undermine their unions, demonize their profession, and generally make their lives a living hell. And you know what happens when you treat teachers like garbage? They quit, they burn out, and who can blame them? They flee for professions that don't require them to remortgage their homes just to afford classroom supplies. And who loses in that scenario? That's right, the kids. The living future of our nation. But hey, at least we saved a few bucks, right? We've got to talk about access to education, because here's the thing. When you make it harder for certain groups to get a quality education, you're not just limiting their future prospects, you're actively perpetuating a cycle of inequality that's harder to break than Musk's grip on reality. And let's not kid ourselves, the policies enacted under Trump didn't exactly scream equal access for all. We're talking about cuts to programs designed to help low-income students, a tax on affirmative action, and a general disregard for the systemic barriers that prevent far too many kids from reaching their full potential. It's almost like they looked at the education system and said, you know what would make this more equitable? If we stacked the deck even further. against those who are already struggling. Now, let's talk about critical thinking. Because in an era of fake news, deep fakes, and politicians who lie every time their lips move, the ability to think critically is less of a soft skill and more of a survival tactic. But unfortunately, the kind of education promoted under Trump seemed less focused on fostering critical thinkers and more focused on churning out obedient little worker bees who don't question authority or, God forbid, start to think for themselves. It's like replacing a library full of diverse perspectives with a single, heavily redacted textbook and calling it balanced. And look, I'm not saying we need to turn every classroom into a Marxist book club, but when you discourage kids from questioning the status quo, from engaging in thoughtful debate, from considering different viewpoints, you're not preparing them for the real world. You're actively hindering their ability to navigate it. And finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the elephant in the drafty, poorly lit, underfunded classroom. The totally understandable erosion of public trust in education. Because when you spend years demonizing teachers, defunding schools, and turning education into a political football, it has consequences. People start to lose faith in the system. They become more susceptible to conspiracy theories and misinformation, which may, after all, be the aim of those in power. They disengage from the process, which, let's be honest, is exactly what those in power want. Because an informed and engaged citizenry is much harder to control than one that's apathetic and distrustful. So yeah, the future of education in a post-Trump world is a bit bleak and uncertain, to say the least. But one thing's for sure, if we want to avoid a future where blind ignorance reigns supreme and critical thinking is relegated to the history books, which Trump is rewriting as we speak, we need to start fighting back now. So, there you have it, folks. The long-term effects of Trump's educational policies will be significant, influencing everything from curriculum and funding to equity and civic engagement. We're talking about potentially widening the achievement gap, exacerbating social inequalities, and creating a generation ill-equipped to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. But it's not inevitable, no. The overarching impact will depend on various factors, including local and state responses, public opinion, and the broader political climate. In other words, you, the people. The future of education is not a foregone conclusion. It's a battle that's still being fought, and it's one we can't afford to lose. So stay informed, stay engaged, stay with me on this channel. And for the love of all that is good and decent, let's make sure the next generation inherits an education system that empowers, not enslaves. Thanks for listening, and please don't forget to like and subscribe, because together we can make a difference.